A$AP Rocky's new singles Tailor Swif and Ruby Rosemary have everyone excited for his album Don't Be Dumb.
Shoot my shot, got it wet. Bet that's all net, girl, that's wet.
And the production on these songs is a big reason why. So today let's break down how these two beats were made, some key beat making ideas that you don't see often in them, and the beat making techniques that you can use for your own production. Let's start this off by looking at Tailor Swif. Between these two beats, this one is more straightforward and simple when you break it down. To make this, here is the classic soul sample that was used. And the producer of this song, Hit Kid, used the beginning section of the sample here, the part with all of these strings. But what you'll notice is that there's one section within the beginning of this sample that stands out, where this additional layer of flutes come in. And this flute section is what gets looped for the beat, so a smart decision here to choose a piece of the sample that feels more unique. So let's go ahead and recreate this part for the beat. From here, two things are done. Number one, the drums are removed from the sample using stem splitting technology like so. And then the entire loop gets pitched down 5 semitones. Then from here we have simple trap drums added to the beat. We have this snare. We have this hi-hat pattern which has these additional notes every once in a while to keep things interesting. And then we have these 808s where the same note gets used over and over. We also have this kick that shows up and disappears every so often throughout the entire beat as well. You can see the pattern itself exactly mimics when the 808 hits. And that's pretty much the whole beat. Halftime is thrown onto the main sample every once in a while as well, just to keep things interesting. This is a tool that pitches the sample way down and slows it down as well. But yeah, that's mostly it. Like I mentioned, a very simple beat, but still effective. Next up, let's look at Ruby Rosemary. This beat has more advanced beat making techniques in it. This beat was produced by The Alchemist, my favorite producer of all time. So let's start by looking at the sample. This is a Swedish soul sample, so already something that's a bit different and unique. Now, when you look at which part of the sample gets used, it's this minimal section here. If we compare this to the other areas in the sample, you can hear we have much more instrumentation. We have drums and pianos and flutes. And this is something that I recommend when it comes to sample selection. Yes, you can use a dense part of the sample like this for your beat, and it might make it easier to build your main ideas for your beat really quickly. But you'll also find it becomes harder to add more and to make changes within your beat if you use such a dense piece of the sample. And this might be why you're struggling to turn your loop into a full beat when using samples. Whereas if we instead use a part of the sample like what The Alchemist uses for this beat, yes, it's much more minimal and much more simple, which might make it harder to get the beat to sound full, but this is also what allows you so much more flexibility. So basically, pick your poison. Now from here, the next thing The Alchemist does is he uses stem splitting technology again to get rid of the vocals and drums. Now all we're left with is the instrumentation. From here, he drops the sample down 9.5 semitones. What this does is it shifts the entire frequency pocket of the sample down. By pitching the sample down this much, it now fills up the key frequencies to get this beat to sound full, frequencies in that low mid region. Otherwise, if kept at the original pitch, more sounds would probably have to be added into this beat to get it to sound complete. From here, if we take a listen to the sample right now to see what we have, what you'll notice is that the Alchemist doesn't simply loop this sample. Instead, he makes multiple chops and rearranges all the pieces together. Now, the reason why I believe looping wouldn't work in this situation is because there isn't a change in the progression if he did just loop this piece. I'll play it again so you can hear. Now, in case this is hard for you to hear, let me show you this visually instead. Here, I'm using my plugin that helps make sampling easier by showing you all the notes in your sample. So take a look at what's going on in these lower notes here. Even though we have a lot going on melodically up top in the higher notes, there's no changes occurring in the underlying progression within the sample, these lower notes here. So this is something that you can think about. When using samples and if you're deciding on where to place your chops, this is a mistake that can make your beats feel like they're not going anywhere if you use chops where the underlying notes aren't changing. Now let's compare this to the loop that the Alchemist does use and builds using this sample instead. Here are the chops that he uses, but this time pay attention to what's happening in the lower notes here. You can see the Alchemist builds an idea that actually has a progression, where the notes underneath are actually changing. And this is an approach that you can consider when you're chopping up your samples. I know a lot of tutorials talk about chopping on the transients and drums, and that can be a fine approach. But instead, finding these lower notes and chopping on them can help you create an actual progression in your beat, and that will help your beats just sound better overall. And again, if you have trouble doing this by ear, that's partly why I built this sample. It's dropping soon, and you can join the waitlist in the description box below and get a juicy discount when it does drop. So this is how the Alchemist starts this beat. Then for the third bar, he uses the same first chop once again, but for the fourth bar, he finds yet another chop that has differing notes underneath, and in total builds a more advanced 4-bar progression here. From here, the Alchemist also does some unusual structuring around the sample. At 78-ish BPM, you would expect the drum pattern to sound something like this. But instead, the Alchemist decides to make the beat in half time essentially. So here, we expand the kicks to play at half the speed. Same thing with the hi-hats and the snares. And this is what we get with this unusual drum structuring. One thing I want to point out, a really smart idea to use a hi-hat that has that slight rattle on top. This is what helps do a good job in filling up the higher end of the beat. From here, the Alchemist also chooses to change the bass line in the beat and create his own pattern rather than using what the sample has. So again, here is what every note in the entire loop looks like. And by the way, this plugin also lets you grab any note in your sample and export it if you want. So this is what the original bass pattern is doing. It's an F sharp, then an E, F sharp again, and then an E again. But the Alchemist decides to do something different here. First, he removes the low end from the sample and creates his own bass line, taking this note and bumping it up to a G. So as you can see, this beat has more advanced and unusual techniques in it. Personally, I'm biased towards the Alchemist beat, but let me know which beat you prefer in the comments below. Again, if you want to join the waitlist for this fancy plugin of mine, link is in the description box below. Waitlist members will enjoy a juicy discount on it. I hope you enjoyed this video. I do have another one next to me on A$AP Rocky's first album. If you're a fan of his, you'll enjoy that video. Otherwise, hit like and subscribe, and I will see you next week. Bye.